Well, you can't say that this wasn't a wild ride. We begin our story in the turn of the millennium with the original that put Intelligent on the map for its new fans, introducing original story moments, plot writing, and an engaging questline spun out of the Mario canon that was available in 2000. It was quite beloved, and fans were eager for more. TTYD and Super Paper Mario followed a while later, which mostly kept to the formula that people were loving from Intelligent, with the latter showing cracks in the design by tossing out the turn-based combat for a platforming-based system which reduced complexity in the plot by removing abilities for character development, but the story was still rock solid, arguably more rock solid than the other TTYD. So it could still be enjoyed as an RPG. Sticker Star followed up and totally trashed the series by removing all the elements from the original trilogy that made the series special, and Color Splash could only be said to provide the modest improvements while still being the same formula as Sticker Star, infuriatingly enough. Now, will Origami King be the game that will affirm that this series still has hope to be as good as it used to be? Origami King begins by Mario doing the usual thing of being invited to a different country for another festival, and after arriving in a bizarrely deserted castle town, Mario does make his way to the person who eventually invited him to this, Princess Peach, only to learn immediately that Peach has been transformed into a folded parody of herself speaking in garbles and sinister tones. It seems like a malevolent force has taken over the castle, and unfortunately, Peach outfoxes Mario and throws him in the dungeon to begin his new adventure. After escaping pretty much immediately, Mario quickly gets joined up during his escape by a folded fairy named Olivia being trapped behind a wall. Olivia begins telling us what actually happened. The castle and the country has been taken over by her brother Ollie, the Origami King, who has gained the ability to fold the paper people into origami creatures that are now under his control. Ollie is doing this in order to transform the world into his own image because he believes that the origami is the superior life form. After they manage to escape that prison and start making their plan to take down the Ollie regime, Ollie launches his contingency plan, using his powers over the fabric world they inhabit to steal the Mushroom Kingdom and levitate it high in the sky, supporting by colored ribbons, keeping him protected and able to instill his origami vision on the rest of the Mushroom Kingdom without Mario having any ability to reach him. This begins Mario's new quest, cutting the colored ribbons which stretch across the kingdom. 5 ribbons means 5 regions to go and punch in the face. Okay, so before we get started with the actual review, I will say that Origami is paying lip service to returning to the old ways. They have the chapter-based design, and they still retain their strong writing chops. Even in the bad years of Sticker Star and Color Splash, Intelligent always had that brilliant writing staff that would be giving these prototypical scenes in any other RPG, and turning them into these eccentric personalities and these memorable lines that really make their characters and the regions they go to feel multidimensional and interesting to learn more about, talk to, and eventually explore in their entirety. That definitely hasn't changed here, as Olivia's character is fantastic. She's the usual child character, naive, infectiously optimistic and happy all the time, hopeful and full of expectations, and willingness to help out in any argument or any problem they come about. Since we are unfortunately sticking with the one-partner idea, Olivia does have an abundance of opportunity to speak, especially since she's put alongside the completely mute Paper Mario. She gets to develop her character, and we get to watch her in action as she comes to terms with the fact that Ollie will have to be dethroned, and there are some problems that are actually too big for her to solve because she's a child. But it's very interesting to see that she has to come to terms with completely throwing Ollie to the side because Ollie is her brother. I did really like Olivia. She's quirky and has this bright, odd personality that lights up the screen when she really gets going, which is good because, again, Paper Mario is just a charisma vacuum. The game does provide a host of side characters to bounce Olivia off of, so that we do get to see her in a variety of situations where she has to navigate the world and help Mario find where the colored ribbons actually are, and be able to actually get to them when they eventually show up. The side characters don't actually have much going on in story importance, as they usually do one or several things to help Mario and then are immediately discarded, which again is kind of par for the course for Paper Mario games, but their inclusion does support a strong storyline to tie the game together and keep players interested in continuing the journey. The one exception is Bobby, a random Bob-omb you meet about halfway through the game that joins as Mario's new partner for about one chapter. Bobby is very important since he does stick around a lot longer than the other NPCs, and he has his actual own quirks and character. He has an actual full personality. Being an amnesiac, he doesn't actually remember his background, his name, his occupation, or really even his own culture, but since Mario is helping him out, he does want to return the favor, helping the pair through the samurai film set level and getting down a mountain, Japanese, I don't remember, it was some Japanese place. Bobby isn't really super helpful since he has no abilities and gets trapped a couple of times. That actually slows down the pair he's trying to help pretty hard for about a half hour. But his character is still a delight to have along and gives us a new relationship to explore because, again, strong writing chops, they made a fully fledged character with this guy. Bobby's arc comes to a head when Ollie finally reappears after that samurai film set and crushed Olivia under a giant boulder that Mario and Bobby obviously can't move because it's about 400 tons. This is when Bobby gets an idea, and after a severe detour, the pair returns with an heirloom that Bobby left behind during the incident where he lost his memory. Bobby uses the heirloom and orders Mario to detonate himself to destroy the boulder. Obviously, Mario thinks this is completely nuts, but eventually, Bobby has him agree to the plan, blows up Bobby, and does save Olivia in the process. Bobby was special because this is the first time in the series where a main character actually got killed. In Super Paper Mario, characters were dying, but they were revived after an adventure in the afterlife in about chapter 7 or 8. This time there are no takesies backsies, which is really unique since his death did have a lot of narrative weight behind it, and Intelligent did not shy away from showing it. There is no return of his ghost to the team, there's no shying away from the impact of the death. It's played completely straight, and it works brilliantly as the child Olivia realizes what happens and immediately retreats into her depression, which requires Mario to try and cheer her up to convince her to go on the adventure again, which isn't exactly realistic, but again it kind of works in the RPG context that we're putting it in. Giving her acceptance in the face of what happened, especially since Bobby was sacrificing himself for her, and at least Mario does get that ghost voice from Bobby to show the audience that he was content with his own self-sacrifice, since in the Bob-omb culture, according to Intelligent, going out with a bang is very important to their people. They want to be an important part of somebody's story, not just languishing in retirement. And honestly, it's up there as one of the best moments in the entire series, even though this game has its own problems. Again, I don't consider that it's a cop-out that Bobby's ghost talks to Mario, because again, he's a charisma vacuum, he's not exactly a character, he doesn't reveal himself to Olivia where it matters, and it's kind of more done for the audience's sake to round out his character rather than as a cop-out to just get away from the emotional damage that it would cause to Olivia, because they did the important thing by making Bobby immediately dissipate so that Olivia could not see him. On the flip side, where the main characters are pretty great across the board, the villain of Origami King sucks drawers. There's no way around it. Bowser and Grotus were interesting villains to watch work towards their plan of world domination. They were trying new schemes and discarding the failed ones. They were actually trying more than one thing. But in Origami King, we barely get to see scenes of Ollie, the one where he tried to kill Olivia, being one in a rare handful. Plus, Ollie as a villain is the ultimate boredom, being totally fixated on this superior being talk and spending most of his dialogue scenes finding 6 different ways to say the same thing that are all in this insufferable, better than thou tone of voice. And again, this sort of villain work makes it clear why it was important to have those transitional scenes focusing on the villain in the original trilogy. It's because we get insights into the villain character, which is important in any story. We need to understand the motivations of the villains, and them developing these variety of plans is a brilliant way in showcasing their perspectives, their planning abilities, and what's actually important to them, which we don't get from Ollie because he's barely on screen. The worst thing about his character is his motivation. In the late game, we do end up meeting the Toad that originally folded Ollie and Olivia using magical craftsmanship. He attempted to teach them right from wrong because they became sentient, but after folding too much power into both of them and finding his actual motivation, Ollie escaped to begin this whole origami plan. And this is because when Ollie was originally folded, the craftsman had decided to scribble something on the paper that Ollie was originally made from. And this horrifying revelation that he didn't care about the paper that Ollie was made from drove him to remake the entire Mushroom Kingdom in his origami image. This motivation is so far into I don't give a shit territory that after that, it was impossible for the game to recover. If that's how little it took for the villain to become the villain, then the entire story of this game is retroactively trash. Ollie is such an ironically two-dimensional villain that any time he was on screen is now a total waste of time. He's literally just a fill-in-the-blank, put villain here line on a script that at some point he had this motivation to do the things that he does is so completely petty, and what makes it worse is that immediately after Ollie is defeated, he completely changes his mind and helps to put the Mushroom Kingdom back to the way it was. Do you remember Super Paper Mario, where Bleck was originally motivated by his true love going missing one day? The only person who really cared about him after he was dropped off in the human world that vehemently hated him? And that made sense as his backstory, since his despair was so deep ingrained in him that it couldn't make him see the good in the world. Yeah, Ollie is doing all this because his creator wrote on him with a marker. Can you completely see the vast difference in quality between these two characters? The chapter villains are somehow even worse because for whatever reason, rather than just going back to the villains that had story arcs and were deeply involved with the plot of the whole arc like Crump and Grubba, Origami King's bosses are all those 3D objects from the previous two games given personalities and animated, and all of them are only revealed right before their boss fights. They're not involved in the chapter-based story up until the very end. Intelligent thought it'd be a good idea for their bosses to be things like a stapler and scissors 3D modeled, and thought it wouldn't look completely absurd for them to speak like normal characters. The inclusion of these bosses makes no goddamn sense, and I can't take them seriously because we basically don't get to see them do much of any importance. I mean, before we get to see them cutting apart toads and taping them to things and sticking them all together, and that's kinda cool, but it doesn't have any implication on anything beyond the freaking fortresses that they're inhabited in. It's goddamn Mario platformer boss logic. I mean, come on. In the original, we get to see Tubba Blubba a couple times and sneak into his castle where he is before we actually get to fight him. Origami King has only one dialogue scene with each boss, and that's about it. Intelligent did give them quirky personalities and funny dialogue, but again, it doesn't really mean anything since we're talking to a 3D stapler, which doesn't convey emotion or individuality. It's a stapler that looks like every other stapler in real life, and no matter how many times you staple toads to a wall before you find them, I couldn't give less of a crap. It doesn't work. It's a stapler. It's just a stapler. It's a giant stapler, but it doesn't have any character. It doesn't have any personality in its design, so how can I take a stapler seriously as an antagonist? I get it's a paper world, but in real life, to the audience, we've seen staplers before. It needs to convey actual danger. It needs to have an arc. It needs to have a reason for us to want to defeat it, other than it's the villain, go beat it up. What does start improving things is that Intelligent finally bit the bullet and threw out the sticker-based combat, a major failure of their last 2 games, and decided to replace it with something that looks like turn-based combat but doesn't act like it in the slightest. For some odd reason, and I have no idea why, Intelligent settled on puzzle games for its combat design. The ultimate goal of the wheel combat system is that Mario has to rearrange the enemies on the wheel and his own movement path in order to eliminate all the enemies on the wheel in one turn, because that's how you get rewarded with the maximum amount of cash. If he fails to do that, then the enemies will hit Mario with a minimum amount of damage and he'll be able to finish the battle next turn. I still do not like this combat since it doesn't have any tactical complexity of legitimate turn-based combat where you can out-strategize the tougher fights, and you get to do these lighter ones and get to do it as maximum efficiency. There's still a strategy even when you're not in actual danger. You get to utilize your variety of ways of attack in order to actually make the combat yours, find your own special strategy. In this combat, you just get to solve different circular puzzles in order to do the combat, which I found annoying a lot of the time since my brain just couldn't get itself around some of the harder puzzles, leading to a lot of back and forth and trying solutions, which you don't get the chance to do since you're always on a timer in the combat to set up your turn. You can buy more time, but some of the puzzles are so difficult to figure out that I'd be buying time 5 times during one round and then just giving up since the game drowns you in so many coins anyway, but I'll still feel like a shit because I failed to solve the puzzle. Origami King doesn't really have an upper limit on your cash. This is one of the rare Mario games where you can carry 4 digits worth of coins around. I think you might even have 5. Of course, the boss fights do not operate like this at all and are closer to the original turn-based idea, since bosses have special attacks that you'll have to use the wheel spaces correctly in order to figure out to dodge them, and you need to do that because their special attacks are almost always instant kill, or you'll just get smashed in the face for like half your health bar. You do not want to take on these guys' special attacks, which again kind of works against the turn-based idea because that is not really real difficulty, okay? You can have your special attacks, but having them being that high runs you into the problem of you're either having no difficulty or you're having max difficulty. Not having a middle ground kinda makes it really stupid. The boss fights on all the other levels do work pretty well since they do still have the complexity of tactical combat, and they do allow for some time that we get to talk to the boss, banter, insult each other, which does help make the encounters much more memorable than the weaker games in the series. They do have their own weaknesses and you will have to strategize around them to exploit what you can with this wheel arrangement sort of ideal, but again, it's not really like decent strategy. It's a puzzle, okay? There's really only one way to solve this. There are ways you can set it up differently, but there's only one strategy. It's not complex, which is the problem, which I'm still frustrated that Intelligent is still doing these sorts of things. As an RPG in its entirety, Origami King has started to improve quite a bit from the previous 2 games. It has started ditching parts of the shit Trilogy's formula and supplanting it with some of the original Trilogy, such as the chapter-based storytelling. They have the characterization of the Mario enemies, and they have the interesting regional locales to go to. However, while the locations in the game are bright and interesting and completely different from each other, they still aren't as memorable as the chapters of the original Trilogy since they lack unique puzzles, cities to go to, and subquests, so the story overall is a lot looser and it's less defined. That's why the old idea of the RPG party works well, since it helps to define the story and the plot of the chapters that those characters that we pick up appear in, because they usually do it one a chapter, since they are directly involved with what's going on, rather than Olivia, who is involved in everything going on, and it's just broad application overall, and it varies, rather than having just the good ideas for every character. Olivia just has middling results with everything because there's only one partner to go with. A lot of the chapters don't have a city that Mario goes to in order to start their journey, and they lack the important plot turns and story beats that the original chapter-based storytelling had. For example, one of the better parts of Origami King is their attempt at a horror level where they go out to an abandoned cruise liner in order to look for an item that they need, and Mario does get to explore the deserted liner to try and find clues to why it's deserted and in the middle of nowhere. It's a pretty short level comparatively, but it could have been a good one if they had an appropriately spooky explanation and highlights and game details to what happened in the liner, but overall Origami King doesn't have that. The answer is that the ship was attacked by a killer squid randomly. What a boring conclusion to that possible bit of fun. One of the bosses requires us to play great disco music for him so that he'll come out of his room so that we can do the boss fight, which is an interesting little puzzle to locate the record that he's interested in, doing a little bit of detective work and dialogue. Again, it's very short, but it's appreciated that they're trying to vary it up, even in the small ways. And on a side note to that, Origami King has a few tunes with vocal performances, and really Origami King's soundtrack is a step up from even the original trilogy with these inclusions, since they're fantastically scored. I wish that Intelligent and Nintendo proper will start embracing more voice acting, since the Switch generation is finally starting to bring some of that on board after like 30 years of ignoring it. And to be honest, it's doing pretty well in the cases that do exist. The final ribbon in the game has us going up to a spa in the skies, which Bowser's flotilla crashed into, which caused the Koopa clan to be in debt to the spa, and they ended up being forced to work there indefinitely. Bowser Jr. got injured during the attack, so the team have to take him to all of the hot springs in order to revitalize him and start working towards unlocking the road to that ribbon. Overall, Origami King has some classic plot ideas and storylines, but without the key defining features of the original trilogy, the game overall is just not as memorable and therefore not as fun as the original trilogy's games. TTYD I could almost rattle off by heart right now, but even writing the script I can barely remember 2 of the 5 regions in their entirety, because they do lack that string of side characters, partners, and well-defined chapter breaks throughout their narrative design. They do have the off-the-wall writing to make interesting games, like the whole plot of Luigi in Origami King is that he's running around and ends up finding random keys to hand to Mario because he's hoping to find the one key that will unlock Mushroom Castle, but he still ends up giving Mario the keys that he requires throughout his adventure, so the 6 times that we do get to see Luigi are very important. It's just that Intelligent needs to start taking these ideas and putting them in better plot structures, again like the original trilogy had, because it makes a world of difference. It defines the game a hell of a lot better, and better definitions, better remembered points in the game, better remembered beats. The definitions are what makes the difference, because Origami King does have the moments, they're just not connected together very well, and that's what kind of makes the game flimsy. In the end though, while the plot of itself is totally devoid of these meaningful characters and emotional turnabouts, Origami King is the closest that modern Intelligent has gotten to recapturing the spark of the ingenuity found in the original trilogy. It's easy to see why I'm going to call these games the shit trilogy of Paper Mario. The poor two-dimensional man has not had the best life since 2008, and I think it comes down to the simple fact that at this time in video game history, the issue of these decades-long running series is running into the issue of the natural employment shakeups of any company. It's just a fact that at some point these companies will continue to exist and utilize their famous IPs, but the teams that made them what they are will be disbanded and cobbled together with new people, and I think that at this point Paper Mario falls into that camp, since no games could be more different than Super Paper Mario and Sticker Star. Somewhere between those 3 to 5 years, something major changed in Intelligent, and it changed for the worse. While they retained the brilliant comedic writing throughout all those years, the core gameplay ideas of the RPG that they were working with have been thrown out of the formula and replaced with utter nonsense that only serves to support player annoyance. The ideal would be that we understand that teams will have to change since people can't be employed forever, but that new creativity would come in and replace old ideas with fresh ones of equal value, and clearly in Paper Mario that has not happened. I just want to make it clear that Origami King in of itself is still a great game, having some great characters in of themselves, such as this game's Luigi, Olivia, Bobby, and the Bowser family, along with quite a few good plot turns. It has its moments, but while Origami King has these sparkles of greatness here and there, the core of the game is flimsy. The villain is barely seen and badly motivated. We don't get to learn much about him. The locations that Mario goes to don't have the interesting conflicts of the good trilogy, and just the plot structure of this game in its entirety is weirdly paced and badly connected. It's just a series of places we have to go to, not a series of interesting places full of conflict that we have to solve. I'm just reminded of things like the XS Express detective story, the Wrestling Federation, the business with figuring out Duplus's major identity while he's transforming an entire village for a joke. Even, fighting that dragon had some pathos to it. And, while Paper Mario doesn't have nearly as much, we were fighting the TMNT, we were dealing with the Grubba nonsense, we were having an island adventure in Lava Island, whatever it's called, and even, Shy Guy Toy Box. It's very interesting to go in a pastel-colored world where these guys in cute little suits, we have to fight and kill them because they just keep stealing everything, and that's the major difference, is that, like I said, I can rattle all of that off, I can't remember much about Origami King. And again, while, all those are positives and negatives towards the original and the shit trilogy, I am still going to say that there is fun to be had in Origami King. It is definitely a well worth purchase, but if you are looking for an actual buying decision, especially now in 2020 when this game was originally released, there are easily better, more emotional and impactful RPGs to be found on the market that have the story chops to stand on their own, along with the strategic and interesting battles to be found in their games. Honestly, if you are looking for the best of the best RPGs, if you are looking for something that will truly be worth of your time, I can't recommend Origami King. But if you're just looking for a Mario game that, is going to fill space and is going to be as well made as it needs to be a good game rather than the best game, then you're probably fine to pick up Origami King. It's lacking, but at the very least, Intelligent put a lot of itself into this game. They put production values out the wazoo for this, and has started making some good design choices to change things back to the way they should be. But at the end of the day, at this point, Paper Mario needs a revolution to be put back on the straight and narrow, not a restructuring of what got us into the shit trilogy in the first place.